Hey everybody, John Brown here today doing a review of the Manhattan Project. You may have seen it just came out on the App Store the other day, so I thought it'd be a good idea to do a review for it, give you an idea of what it's like in case you're interested in the app or the app makes you interested in the board game. It's a worker placement game. What attracted me to it originally was the theme where you're building different nuclear weapons. But it's not a combat-based game. There is a little bit of player conflict in the game, but that's not the main focus. You don't ever actually use the weapons on each other, although there is some interplay with fighters and bombers. It also has an interesting idea of workers being different types of workers. This is one of the first games to do something like that, where not every worker is the same. You have your regular workers, you also have scientists and engineers that are capable of doing different things. And it also has the idea of on your turn you can place workers or take them all back, something that we've seen in other games since then as well. So let's talk about how to play the game and what I think about it. Alright, so here's the main board for the Manhattan Project. And on your turn, you can do a couple different things. You can go to up to one space. It's optional to go to the main board, but you can go to one space or none on the main board, and then go to as many buildings on your player board as you have built. Now you don't start with any buildings built, so on your first turn, you could hypothetically go to the construction space, and we'll talk about what each one of these do, and then build a building, put it onto your player board, and now it's available to you. So I could then go to the building that I just built on my player board. We're going to start with these 4 basic workers, and they're just basic workers, and we can eventually upgrade them. We'll also have counters for bombers and for fighters that start at 0. So again, on a turn, I can go to the player board, or the main board, and as many spaces on my player board. At some point, I'm obviously going to need my workers back, and if I do that, my entire turn is going to be getting my workers back. I'm going to take any workers from the main board or my player board. I'm also going to clear off any workers I have on any other player's boards, and we'll see, you normally can't do that, but there are ways to do that in this game. I'm going to remove any of these contractor workers down here that aren't in any player color from my board and also from the main board. But we'll see how all these people come out eventually. Now, let's talk about what each one of these spaces do. The construction space allows me to build, and if we take a quick look at the board here, we can see that it says here, if we go with the guy with the hard hat, it says do not pay for the 2 or 3 cost buildings. And we look up here, the first 2 buildings either cost 2 or 3 money, and they progressively go up all the way to 20. And if I go to the construction space with a engineer, which I don't have available at the beginning of the game, but I can build either one of these spaces for free. But if I go with a scientist or a regular worker, I have to pay the cost. And this is the one space on the main board where as many players that want to go there can. So if I were to, for example, go to this space, players can still go here or here, but can't go here. But construction is the one space that as many people can go to as they want to, and you don't have to wait for someone to clear off the board. Now, if I buy a building, of course, all these will slide down, and the first 6 cards that are available are all the basic beginner buildings. They're not as good as some of the other buildings. And as you can see, they all take either 1 of any type of worker, it's what the question mark means, or 2 in this case, and then we get into the more advanced buildings. This last card in 20 spot is always going to be one of the regular buildings, and then another regular building will come out. And these buildings are going to allow us to do different things on our turns. So any of these buildings that I buy will go to my player board, and then on that turn or a later turn, I can use them. There are mines that get us yellow cake, which we need in order to make plutonium and uranium. And they're different things. So for example, this would take 2 engineers, give us 3. This would take 3 of any type and give us 4. There are factories that either give us fighters or bombers or give us money. There are universities that potentially give us scientists and engineers. There are enrichment plants that give us uranium. So here's one of the ways to get uranium. So for example, this one I would need to spend 3 money. I'd have to send a scientist there and 1 yellow cake, and then I would get a uranium. And then here's just a different example. So if I get uranium, that's kept track of over here. So both players will start at 0, and if I get a uranium, I'll move 1 up on the uranium track. It's really pretty simple. And then here are reactors, just 2 different examples that generate plutonium. Some of the other things, we can get 2 fighters or get 2 bombers if we go to either of these spaces, which will keep track on our player board over there. And then as we use them, they'll go down. We can get more money. So For example, in this space, I have to spend 3 yellow cake, but I get 5 money. Here, I get 5 money, but have to give all the other players 2, or if I send a engineer or scientist, I simply get 3 money. Here's a space to convert money to yellow cake, get yellow cake, but give all the other players yellow cake, or simply get yellow cake for yourself if you send an engineer. Universities are one of the ways that allow you to get more workers. There are universities in the buildings that you can build, but they also have them on the main board. Now, anytime that you get a worker, you'll normally get them from your own supply if you haven't had them available yet. So those 4 engineers and 4 scientists aren't available to us at the beginning of the game. So if I go to a university and get an engineer or a scientist, they now come into my worker pool and I have them for the rest of the game. However, if I have no more available to me, which is especially going to happen if I go to this space that gives 3 regular workers, and I don't have any regular workers, because I start with all of them, then I'll get these and they will become contractors for me basically. They are now part of my worker pool, but at any point later in the game, when workers are pulled off the main board and my player board, when I pull workers off, these contractors will now go back into the general supply. So they're kind of one-time use workers. So that's how the university works. Now, here's another way to generate plutonium and uranium. So we pay the cost and we move up on the boards depending on where we go. And then this space, bomb design. So if I go here, at any point during the game, there will be bombs available, 1 more than the number of players. So in a 3-player game, there'll be 4 available. In a 2-player game, 3, so on and so forth. If I'm the person who goes there, and I have to go there with both a scientist and an engineer, so this is one of the spaces, the only space on the main board that takes more than 1 worker, I go there, I get to pick up the 3 cards that have been face up so far. I get to take one of them, pass the rest to the other players. Each player will take 1 in turn order, and then the last one will come back to me. So every player will get 1 card, but the player who goes to that space will get first choice and get 2 cards. So this is the only way you score points during the game. So there's also, on your turn, if you place workers, you can place workers on the main board, on your player board, and also on bombs available in your hand. There are uranium bombs and plutonium bombs. So the uranium bombs are pretty simple. If I build it, I have to place a scientist and 2 engineers here. I have to pay for uranium. It's worth 15 points. If I pay an additional $2, I can load it on a bomber. I have to, however, have a bomber available. So if I have built this bomb, I can pay the money, then decrease my bombers by 1, and that bomb is now loaded. So that will make the bomb increase in its point value. There are these little markers here that say +5. So anytime you load a bomb, it's worth an additional 5 points. Now, plutonium bombs are a little bit different. If I build them, they're worth the gray value here, the first value. If I load it, they're worth an additional 5. So how do you get to this value? Well, after you've built a plutonium bomb, you can decide to test it. If you test it, you blow it up and it's destroyed. However, the first player to do so will get this test marker, and that will be worth, in a 2-player game, 6 points. There are more of these with more point values depending on the number of players, so you have these test markers according to the number of players, and the last one is always going to be worth 0. So why would I destroy, let's say, a 10-point bomb? Now it'll give me 6, or 0, depending on the situation, but every other bomb, after you get one of those test markers, will increase in value. So if I built this, and then I was the first to test it, I would be losing 4 points basically, but then if I build this bomb later, instead of being worth 20 points, it is worth 34 points because I've tested one. Now the last few spaces we're going to talk about are the airstrike repair spaces here, and the espionage. So I can do airstrikes on my turn. So I have spent time building up fighters and bombers, and I can send as many fighters and bombers out as I want. Now, if I send fighters out, for every fighter I send out, I can basically destroy someone else's either fighter or bomber. I get to choose. That's important because if I want to send bombers out, I can do damage to other players' buildings. If I send 1 bomber out, I can do 1 damage. If I send 2, I can do 2 damage to a building, or hit, 2 different buildings for 1. And as many of these damage tokens can be placed as I have bombers available to do on someone's building. If that happens, that building cannot be activated. In order to repair that damage, a player can go to the repair space, pay 5 money, and they get 3 total damage that they can repair. every other player then can, in turn order, can choose to pay $2 to repair 1 damage, an additional 3 to repair an additional damage, an additional 5 to repair 1 more. So they can pay up to a total of 10 to repair damage. So sometimes you're hoping another player will go there, and sometimes you have to go there yourself if you really want to be able to activate that building. The last and coolest space on the main board, in my opinion, is the espionage track. I can spend 3 money to go here, move up 1 on the track, and now on that turn, I can not only send people to my own buildings, but I can send people to another player's building. If I go to the espionage track later, I move up to 2, and now on that turn, I can use up to 2 buildings that other players have on their board. Not only activating powerful buildings that I might need their abilities, but also blocking them from using them until I recall my worker. So one of the biggest things you want to bear in mind in this game is that everything that happens on a turn may affect what happens later. So you can have a lot of interesting combinations where you build a building, then use that building's ability over here on your player board, and then that allows you to use another building on your player board that when you started the turn you didn't have the right resources to use and things like that, or potentially go to other players. So there's both the combinations of things you can do and the timing of when to use the buildings, when to clear off, when to potentially use other players' buildings if you want to, when to potentially damage them, so on and so forth. So timing is a really big thing in this game. So what do I think about the Manhattan Project? Well, short and sweet, it is a solid game. It's not my favorite worker placement game. It doesn't hit the table as often as some of my other games, but I have pretty much nothing negative to say about it. There's some great ideas here, ideas that have been used in many games since then. It's not that old of a game, but its mechanisms have been used in a lot of other games. That timing mechanism of placing guys and taking them back, the espionage, the fighting, you know, don't overvalue the fighting, because as you spend time doing that, you're not doing anything productive. So, you know, there's definitely a lot of interesting strategies. I kind of wish some of the things that were in the promos or the expansion for this game were like you each play as a country and you start with powers. I kind of wish those were available in the base game. One of the reasons I think it may not hit the table a lot is it's not a game I wouldn't necessarily want to play again after playing it. It might start to feel a little samey. Although, to be fair, players do tend to have different strategies as you play, and each player based on what they get, how quickly they can get out workers, and that is going to change how they play. So maybe not, you know, a game I'd want to play every day for the rest of my life, but a lot of solid ideas, a lot of interesting decisions on every turn. One thing I like too that I forgot to mention, I think, in the video was at any point you go to the spaces, the factories that generate money, not the fighters or bombers, but on the main board, the factories that give you money. Also, $1 goes to the bribe pool. It's a little dish on the board next to the cheapest building. Interesting thing. Now, one thing important to remember, it doesn't come out of your money, it comes out of the general supply. Whenever a player then builds that cheapest building, the one on the leftmost part, they actually get all the money in the bribe pool. You know, this blueprint's been sitting around for a while, we want to build it. Another interesting decision as far as timing goes. About the app, I've heard very mixed things. If you're playing on a phone, the text is too small, the AI is very bad. Reminds me a little bit of Dominant Species, a game that I hadn't had a chance to play. I got the app and the AI was awful. I haven't played Manhattan Project yet on the iOS side, but I've heard some negative things. Also not a good tutorial, that the rulebook, it's basically look at the rulebook and play, much like Dominant Species. But it is a solid game. Even if you got the app and didn't really enjoy it, you might like the board game. And if you know the board game well and you're playing it on a bigger device like an iPad or something, then maybe you'll enjoy the app. I've heard some positive things, that it is a faithful translation, just that there are some issues with it. But I thought this would be a good time to look at the game. A solid game that does a lot of solid things that have been used by many games since then. Like Rococo, a game I got to play recently, not a pure worker placement game, but that same idea of the workers do different things. That game, I think, does it even a little bit better. Here it's more about certain spaces are blocked based on the workers you have, but it thematically works. So the workers don't necessarily feel all that much different, but thematically you need to have these type of workers do these things. So a game that I don't really have any negatives to say about, and is one that if you missed, you know, all the hype when it came out originally, might be worth checking out. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll talk to you guys again soon. Alright, bye.